Nobody ever put Andre the Giant under a barbell and wrote down what happened. Not at a meet, not on a platform, not once in a career that lasted more than 25 years, which means the man an entire generation of athletes called the strongest human being they ever touched left behind exactly 0 verified numbers. Think about how strange that is for a moment. This is the golden era we are talking about, a period obsessed with documentation. Arnold's lifts got printed in wider magazines. Franco Columbu's deadlifts were photographed and argued over in gym parking lots for the next 50 years. Every serious strength athlete of the 1970s left a paper trail, because leaving a paper trail was the entire point. Andre left a rumor, and the rumor was enormous. He was billed at 7'4" and 520 pounds, and the billing was doing some heavy lifting of its own because he was almost certainly never 7'4", and the 520 figure only became true in the last miserable years of his life. But the promoters did not need accuracy, they needed a poster. So the question that gives this video its title is genuinely open, and it has to be answered the hard way, which is by looking at who actually put hands on him and deciding whether those people are worth believing. That is what this is. Not a highlight reel. An investigation with a fairly grim ending. Start at the beginning, because the beginning contains one of the best pieces of trivia in the history of professional sport. André René Roussimoff was born on the 19th of May, 1946, in Coulommiers, France, to a Bulgarian father and a Polish mother, on a farm outside a village called Molien. He was a big kid, then an absurd kid, and by roughly 12 years old, he was too large to fit on the school bus with the other children, which created a logistics problem for the family. The neighbor solved it. The neighbor had a truck. The neighbor was Samuel Beckett. Yes, that Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright, the man who wrote Waiting for Godot, who kept a cottage nearby, and who spent a stretch of the late 1950s driving an oversized French farm boy to school in the back of a pickup. Andre talked about it later in life, and when people asked him what the two of them discussed, he said cricket, mostly cricket. One of the most celebrated writers of the 20th century, and the future largest attraction in wrestling, rattling down a country road talking about cricket. There is no way to improve on that. He left school around 14, worked the farm, did some woodworking, and by his late teens, he was in Paris moving furniture, which is where the wrestling business found him. A French-Canadian wrestler named Frank Valois took him on and effectively ran his career for the next decade. He debuted around 1966 under the name Giant Fer, borrowed from a French folk hero, and by 1970 he was working in Japan for the International Wrestling Enterprise, billed there as Monster Roussimoff. Now here is where the story turns, and it turns on something nobody in that dressing room understood yet. Somewhere around this time, reportedly during a medical examination in Japan, Andre was told he had acromegaly, a benign tumor on the pituitary gland, pumping out growth hormone that his body had no ability to switch off. In his case, it started before his growth plates closed, which is why he got tall first, and then kept getting thicker and heavier and denser for the rest of his life. There was no cure available that he was willing to accept. He knew what he had, and as far as anyone close to him could tell, he simply decided not to fight it. Hold that thought, because it explains both halves of this story. It built him and it killed him, and it did both at the same time. The early to mid 1970s is when Andre was closest to what you would call an athlete. He was lean by his own standards, most likely somewhere in the range of 380 to 420 pounds, and he could move. There is footage from Japan and from Montreal of Andre the Giant throwing drop kicks, real ones, both feet, leaving the ground. That single detail tends to break people's mental image of him, because the Andre most viewers carry around is the shuffling, wincing, gigantic figure from the late 1980s. But the man in the 1971 footage is a different creature entirely. And if you want to understand how strong he really was, this is the window you have to look through, not the famous one, this one. Vince McMahon Sr. renamed him Andre the Giant in 1973 and did something clever with him. Instead of parking him in one territory, he rented him out across the entire map, a few weeks here, a few weeks there, so no audience ever got bored and no promoter ever had to explain why the unbeatable giant kept not winning the belt. It made André a fortune, and it made him the most widely seen wrestler on the continent. It also meant a very large number of legitimate strength athletes got to feel what he felt like. Which brings us to the single most credible witness in this entire story, a man whose testimony carries more weight than every other quote combined. Ken Patera. Patera was not a wrestler first. He was an Olympic weightlifter, a member of the 1972 United States team in Munich, a Pan American Games gold medalist, and the first American to clean and jerk 500 pounds. He later turned up in the early World's Strongest Man fields alongside the biggest names in the sport. This is a man who spent his formative years measuring strength for a living, on calibrated equipment, in front of judges, under rules. He knew exactly what 500 pounds felt like because he had put it over his head. Patera wrestled André repeatedly through the mid and late 1970s, and his account, which he has repeated consistently for decades in different interviews to different people, is that he had never felt anything like it. Not a stronger man, not a heavier man, something categorically different, a body that did not respond to leverage the way human bodies were supposed to. That is worth pausing on. Hulk Hogan telling a story about André is entertainment. Ken Patera telling a story about André is closer to an expert witness giving a deposition. Patera had a calibrated internal scale for exactly this, and he came away spooked. There's also one piece of evidence on film where the other man was not cooperating. On the 25th of June, 1976, at Shea Stadium in New York, André faced Chuck Wepner. Wepner was a real heavyweight boxer, the man who had gone the distance with Muhammad Ali the previous year, and who is the reason Rocky exists. The bout was part of a mixed match card built around the Ali versus Antonio Inoki spectacle in Tokyo, which was broadcast into arenas across America that same night. André got hold of him and threw him over the top rope onto the concrete apron. Wepner did not get back in. It is not a laboratory test, and Wepner was a boxer being asked to grapple, which is roughly like asking a sprinter to wrestle a bear. But it is one of the very few moments where André applied his strength to a professional combat athlete who had no particular reason to help him look good. Then there is Arnold, and Arnold's story needs a caveat attached to it. In 1984, the two of them worked together on Conan the Destroyer, where André played the horned god Dagoth under a full-body monster suit. Arnold has told the story many times of André simply picking him up and carrying him, the way an adult carries a small child who is refusing to leave a birthday party, usually in the context of an argument about who was paying the bill. Now consider what Arnold Schwarzenegger weighed in 1984, and what Arnold Schwarzenegger could do in a gym in 1984. This is not a small man being moved by a large one. This is one of the strongest bodybuilders who has ever lived being handled like carry-on luggage. But here is the caveat, and it matters more than the anecdote. By 1984, André was already deep into his decline. His back was failing, his hips were failing, and he was 2 years away from surgery. The man who lifted Arnold like a toddler was a badly damaged version of the man Patera had wrestled a decade earlier, which should tell you something fairly unsettling about what the 1975 version could have done. Now, the folklore. Because any honest look at this has to separate the testimony from the tall tales, and André generated tall tales at industrial volume. The beer stories are the famous ones. The most repeated version has him drinking 119 beers in about 6 hours in a Pennsylvania hotel bar, a figure that comes from people who were reportedly there and has been passed around for 40 years without anything resembling documentation. Other versions put it higher, some put it lower. It is genuinely impossible to verify, and the truth is probably that André drank a staggering amount by any normal standard, and the number grew every time the story got retold. The car flipping stories are worse. There are multiple versions, usually set in Montreal, usually involving a car parked where André did not want it, and none of them trace back to a source you can actually check. They are gym legend. Fun gym legend, but legend. So the honest position is this. His measurable athletic record is a blank page, and every serious claim about his strength rests entirely on the credibility of the men making it, which is exactly why Patera counts and the beer count does not. And then everything falls apart, fast. Here's the mechanism in plain terms because it explains the whole shape of his career. Growth hormone flooding an adult body builds enormous skeletal mass and enormous soft tissue mass. It thickens bone, enlarges the hands and jaw and feet, and packs on functional weight that never had to be earned in a gym. As far as anyone can tell, André never trained with weights in any serious way. He did not need to. His endocrine system was doing the program for him. But the same process quietly wrecks everything that has to hold that mass up. Cartilage degrades, joints wear through, the spine compresses under a load it was never engineered to carry, and the heart enlarges along with everything else. So a man with acromegaly does not get strong and then plateau like a normal athlete. He gets impossibly strong and then falls off a cliff. André's cliff arrived in 1986. He underwent back surgery that year. And if you want a single image for how far things had gone, look at what was happening on the set of The Princess Bride, filmed in England across that same period. André played Fezzik, the gentle giant whose entire character is defined by being able to lift anything. And he could barely lift anyone. Wire rigs and harnesses were used for scenes his character was supposed to perform unassisted, including catching Robin Wright, because his spine could not take it. Carrie Elwes later wrote about watching him work through obvious constant pain and never once complain about it. There is one more detail from that surgery, and it is the moment where the entire story stops being about strength and becomes something else. The anesthesiologist had no idea how much to give him. There was no dosing chart for a human being of André's size and composition, because human beings of André's size and composition do not exist in sufficient numbers for anyone to have written one. So the medical team fell back on the only usable data available, which was how much alcohol he could drink before it affected him, and worked backward from there to estimate the dose. They calibrated surgical anesthesia using bar stories. That is where medicine was, relative to this man's body. Treat 1986 as the hinge. Everything before it belongs to the strongman. Everything after belongs to the damaged icon. And mixing the two without saying so is how the myth got built in the first place. Because everything after is what the world remembers. On the 29th of March, 1987, at the Pontiac Silverdome in Michigan, André faced Hulk Hogan in the most famous match in the history of American professional wrestling. The announced attendance was 93,173, a number the company repeated for decades, and which most serious researchers now put closer to 78,000. Still, the largest indoor crowd most of those people would ever be part of. Hogan slammed him. The building came apart. It became the defining image of an entire industry and the single clip that will play at the end of every André retrospective forever. And the man being slammed that night was a ruin. Post-surgical, in constant pain, moving on a spine that had already been operated on at a body weight that was no longer athletic mass, but simply mass. Whatever André the Giant had been at his physical peak, he had stopped being it years before those 78,000 people ever saw him. That is the cruel joke at the center of this. The most famous version of the strongest man anyone ever met is the weakest version there was. He kept working because the business was all he had and because the money mattered to him. And he moved into tag team work in the early 1990s when singles matches became impossible. On the 27th of January, 1993, he died of heart failure in a hotel room in Paris. He was 46. He was in France to attend his father's funeral, which is about as unkind a piece of timing as history hands out. His ashes were scattered on his ranch in Ellerbe, North Carolina, a property he had bought so he would have somewhere to be alone and enormous in peace. Later that year, he became the first inductee into the WWE Hall of Fame. So what is the verdict? The honest answer is that nobody knows, and anyone who gives you a number is making it up. There is no lift, no meet result, no measurement taken under any condition worth trusting. What there is instead is a stack of testimony from men who had every professional reason to be skeptical, and were not, chief among them, an Olympic weightlifter who had personally clean and jerked 500 pounds and still described André as something outside the category. For a strength historian, that is deeply unsatisfying and also probably the truest answer available. His body was not built by training, it was built by a tumor, and the same tumor made sure nobody would ever get to test it properly before it took him apart. Which leaves one last thought worth sitting with. Every other legend of that era got to prove it, on a platform, in front of judges, with the number written down, and André the Giant is the only one whose strength survives purely on the word of the people who felt it. Somehow that is held up better than any record book would have,